Top of the morning to you, and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Russia shoots down Ukrainian drones as Ukraine repels attack. White House says Russian spying charges against U.S. reporter are ridiculous. Plus, U.S.-Britain walkout at UN on Russian envoy wanted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court. Thank you so much for joining us. Russia said its troops had shot down Ukrainian drones and missiles, while Ukraine claimed that its forces had repelled Russian attacks in various directions. According to the Russian Defense Ministry report on the progress of the special military operation, as they've called it, the armed forces of the Russian Federation continued their military operation in Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and other directions. The report said that the Russian aerospace forces have downed one MiG-29 airplane of Ukrainian Air Force, and the country's air defense forces shot down 13 U.S. high-mobility artillery rocket systems and multiple launch rocket systems, the MLRS shells, and one high-speed anti-radiation missile. On the other hand, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine said that Ukrainian troops repelled multiple Russian attacks in directions towards Liman, Bakhmut, and its air missile and artillery units attacked various Russian targets. Meanwhile, tension runs high in and around Ukraine's eastern city of Bakhmut yesterday as troops on both sides frequently exchanged fire. 21-year-old commander of infantry unit dug in on positions near Bakhmut said, in his words, "It's like this every day. And it's not once a day, it's all the time. Every half an hour, the enemy fires on us and we respond and silence them." Asked about the long-awaited counteroffensive, the commander said there was no doubt it should go ahead, saying Ukrainian forces are ready and that the sooner the better, the enemy should be chased away. Ukrainian military commanders have stressed the importance of holding Bakhmut and other towns and inflicting losses prior to the anticipated counteroffensive. In the meantime, 2 Ukrainian tank crews held firing drills in southeastern Zaporizhzhia region, practicing assault action. One of the T-72 tanks equipped with anti-tank rockets was seen driving across the field and firing alongside another tank. Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov said last week that a spring counteroffensive could begin as soon as mid-April, but did not indicate where exactly. Drills came as President Vladimir Zelensky visited Poland and said Ukrainian troops were still fighting for Bakhmut in the east but could withdraw if they risked being cut off. Bakhmut, in Ukraine's mainly Russian-occupied Donetsk province, has proven to be one of the bloodiest and longest battles of Russia's invasion, now in its 14th month. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said during a trip to Warsaw that Poland would help form a coalition of Western powers to supply warplanes to Ukraine, as it did with battle tanks earlier this year. The Ukrainian leader said Russia would not defeat Europe, while Ukraine and Poland were working closely together.
Thank you very much. Glory to Ukraine. Hello Warsaw, hello Poland, great Polish nation, a great Ukrainian nation. Here, shoulder to shoulder, united on this square by the spirit of freedom, of a great history and of a glorious victory, which we bring closer together. We just need not stop in solidarity. When the battle requires artillery, it should be provided. When victory requires tanks, their roar should be heard on the front line. When independence requires air, we should not pay attention to how Russia will react to aircraft in our country. We shouldn't think about which number looks safer next to the letter F, 16, or some other. It is worth acting in the same way as your leadership has proved itself in the tank coalition, and I believe it will also prove itself in the aviation coalition, because this is a battle for freedom, and it is impossible to win it partially.
The president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians were happy to see their president speak at Warsaw's royal castle. For a lot of people, Zelensky's visit was a reminder that the war sparked by Russia's invasion was still continuing, and it could only be ended by support from Ukraine's allies. Warsaw has positioned itself as one of Kiev's staunchest allies, playing a leading role in persuading sometimes reluctant nations to provide it with heavy weaponry, much of it supplied through Poland.
It was wonderful because it's really strong men that protect our country, that save, that help to save, that don't afraid for everything, and I think he is very brave.
The White House says the Department of State was seeking consular access to Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovic. The Wall Street Journal has denied Gershkovic was spying. The White House called the espionage charge, which carries a prison term of up to 20 years, ridiculous. U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, she had spoken with the Russian counterpart, Vasily Nebenzia, demanding Gershkovic's immediate release.
The Department of State continues to seek consular access to Evan. The U.S. Embassy in Moscow has not yet received any approval for consular access, despite repeated requests. It will likely take some time, so a couple of days, before we have access. But again, this is a priority for this president, and we're going to be steadfast as that. You will see you tomorrow, guys. Have a good day.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States is working through the process to determine whether the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovic's detention by Russia is wrongful, adding it will soon be completed. The wrongfully detained designation means the responsibility for the case will be transferred from the State Department's Bureau of Consular Affairs to the Office of the Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, raising the issue's political profile and allowing the government to allocate more resources to secure his release.
From my perspective, from the department's perspective, there is no higher priority than the safety and security of American citizens around the world, and that includes those who may be wrongfully detained, held hostage, otherwise kept from coming home, being with their families. In Evan's case, we are working through the determination on wrongful detention. And there's a process to do that, and it's something that we're working through very deliberately, but expeditiously as well. In my own mind, there's no doubt that he's being wrongfully detained by Russia, which is exactly what I said to Foreign Minister Lavrov when I spoke to him over the weekend, and insisted that Evan be released immediately.
The Wall Street Journal journalists should be released, and this is about freedom of the press and the importance of journalists to be able to operate and to ask difficult questions and to do their work. And many other allies have expressed exactly the same call on Russia.
Britain's Foreign Minister James Cleverley said Britain has seen discomfort over closer ties between Russia and China. Speaking after a meeting with ministers from fellow NATO members, Cleverley says the alliance will have to be very, very conscious of all potential risks and threats, not just to the Euro-Atlantic region, but also to the Asia-Pacific as well. Cleverley also says Britain will work to reach 2.5% of GDP spent on defense and urge other NATO members to meet a minimum target of 2%. He added that Britain will continue working on a route to Ukrainian accession to NATO in the future.
We have seen discomfort with how close China has got to Russia recently, the recognition that the world, the interconnected world in which we live, is a smaller place than perhaps it was in the past, and that therefore we have to be very, very conscious of all potential risks and threats, not just to the Euro-Atlantic region, but also to the Asia-Pacific as well. We've made it clear that we're going to work quickly towards 2.5%, and we feel, particularly with the current circumstances, the current environment, that 2% should be a floor to which all members subscribe. The priority is about getting them the stuff that they need in the here and now to defend themselves, and we will continue working towards that route ultimately towards NATO membership.
That's right. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he spoke to U.S. President Joe Biden about a series of topics, adding that Ukraine was on the agenda, while calling on Russia to release Gershkovic. Russia's FSB security service said it had arrested Gershkovic, who is a U.S. citizen, and accused him of gathering information about a Russian defense company that was a state secret. On the other hand, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said that Moscow would ignore a letter from media organizations urging the release of the U.S. reporter accused of espionage, saying it was hypocritical. Speaking at a weekly briefing, Zakharova accused Western journalists of ignoring the killing of Russian military blogger Vladimir Tatarsky in St. Petersburg, and said that Russia therefore had the right to ignore as well appeals to release WSJ Wall Street Journal reporter Ivan Gershkovic, detained last week in the Russian city of Yekaterinburg. Zakharova said, in her words, if they treat us this way, then their demands, requests, comments, and also do not require our reaction. That's all. That does not mean that I do not empathize or sympathize. This does not mean that if, God forbid, such tragedies happen again with someone, we will not show sympathy. The United States, Britain, Albania, and Malta walked out on Russia's envoy for children's rights, whom the International Criminal Court wants to arrest on war crimes charges, as she spoke by video to UN Security Council members. Britain and the United States blocked the informal meeting on Ukraine, convened by Russia to focus on evacuating children from conflict zones, from being webcast by the United Nations. The diplomats left the UN conference room where the discussion was being held as Russian Commissioner Maria Belova spoke. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas Greenfield, told reporters that the United States joined Britain in blocking the webcast so that Belova did not have an international platform to spread disinformation and to try to defend the horrible actions that are taking place in Ukraine.
Take the opportunity again to say, as Russia takes on the presidency of the Security Council, we will use every opportunity to push back on their using their perch in the chair to spread disinformation and to use their chair to push support of their efforts. So it's for that reason today that we have opposed their ARIA formula briefer, a woman who has been charged with war crimes, who has been involved in deporting and removal of children from their homes to Russia. And we strongly are opposed to that, and that's why we've joined the UK in blocking UN Web from being used to allow her to have an international podium to spread disinformation and to try to defend her horrible actions that are taking place in Ukraine.
The UN meeting now, and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has met with the Chinese Prime Minister Li Qiang in Beijing, where she's later scheduled to meet with French President Emmanuel Macron and the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Macron arrived one day ahead of von der Leyen, who is visiting China for the first time since becoming European Commission President more than 3 years ago. Last week, she said the EU must de-risk ties with Beijing, including limiting Chinese access to sensitive technology and reducing reliance on China for key inputs. Europe's relations with China have soared in recent years, first due to the stalled investment pact in 2021, and then Beijing's refusal to condemn Russia over its invasion of Ukraine. Both Macron and von der Leyen have said they want to persuade China to use its influence over Russia to bring peace in Ukraine, or at least deter Beijing from directly supporting its big power ally in the conflict. The talks come amidst Chinese protests against US-led technology export restrictions, which it views as part of a broader effort by Washington to contain the risk of what is now the world's second largest economy. And the foreign ministers of Iran and Saudi Arabia met in Beijing for the first formal meeting of their most senior diplomats in more than 7 years, after a China-brokered deal to restore ties between the regional rivals. After years of hostility that fueled conflicts across the Middle East, Tehran and Riyadh agreed to end their diplomatic rift and reopen embassies in a major deal facilitated by China last month. Footage shows Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud and his Iranian counterpart Hussein Amirabdollahian greeting each other before sitting down side by side. In March, China's President Xi Jinping helped broker a surprise deal between regional rivals Tehran and Riyadh to end the 7-year rift and restore diplomatic ties, a display of China's growing influence in the region. In March, the Chinese president spoke by phone with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman Al Saud about several issues. Beijing's role in the breakthrough between Tehran and Riyadh shook up dynamics in the Middle East, where the United States was, for decades, the main mediator. That's the Director General of the Japanese Foreign Ministry's Asian and Oceanian Affairs Bureau, that is Takehiro Funakoshi, has met his South Korean counterpart Kim Gun in Seoul to discuss North Korea. The meeting comes as North Korea has been ramping up its military activity in recent weeks, unveiling new, smaller nuclear warheads, firing an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of striking anywhere in the United States, and testing what it called a nuclear-capable underwater attack drone. Funakoshi Kim and their U.S. counterpart Sung Kim are set to meet on Friday to exchange their assessments on the grave political situation on the Korean Peninsula following North Korea's provocation. After the break, U.S. flies nuclear-capable bombers as tensions soar with North Korea. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. The United States has flown nuclear-capable B-52 bombers to the Korean Peninsula in a show of strength against North Korea as concerns grow that Pyongyang might conduct a nuclear test. South Korean Ministry of National Defense said the long-range bombers took part in joint aerial drills with U.S. and South Korean fighter jets over the Korean Peninsula. Lieutenant General Park Ha-sik, commander of the South Korean Air Force Operation Command, said in a statement the drills show the strong resolve of the Korea-U.S. alliance with its perfect readiness to respond to any provocation by North Korea swiftly and overwhelmingly. The South Korean and its U.S. militaries have been expanding their combined military drills in response to North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. Last month, the allies conducted their biggest field exercises in 5 years, as well as computer simulations from command post training. The U.S. also sent the nuclear-powered USS Nimitz aircraft carrier for naval training with South Korea last week, and U.S., South Korea, Japan anti-submarine drills this week. And now we're pleased to have our guest, Mr. that is Dr. Michael Ogu, Senior Lecturer, Department of Political Science and Public Administration at the Babcock University. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me, Olamide.
No sooner were we talking about the cold, hard, harsh winter of Ukraine and Russia than are we now looking at a counteroffensive as declared by Ukraine in spring. Whichever way you look at it, it appears it's not abating. Could we begin with your initial reactions to the continued fighting between Russia and Ukraine, which for now is spreading in the Donetsk regions, Zaporizhia, as well as Kherson and other directions?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just like you've said, unfortunately, there seems to be no end in sight, in all of these conflicts, and there doesn't seem to be any kind of, peace talks or negotiations or anything like that going on that are serious, to abate this conflict, and that is sad because the carnage continues to go on. The killings, the destructions of property, and all of that. But my best guess would be that the conflict cannot go on forever. It's been over 1 year already. And just as the war continues to progress, I'm sure that at some point, there will be some kind of breakthrough. Of course, now it doesn't appear how that's going to happen because the two leaders remain adamant. Putin and Zelensky remain adamant and continue to pursue their interests. But I'm sure that some window somehow will open for peace. And I hope that will not be very long from now.
Indeed, Dr. Ogu, as the war rages on, are you concerned about casualties which are occurring on both sides? There are reports coming out of Ukraine and coming out of Russia that, for instance, a regiment, a paratrooper regiment, has lost a lot of people, to the extent that they're comparing the loss of the soldiers they lost, to the Soviet-Afghan war, where in 9 years they lost about 56 soldiers. And in this year alone, within this year alone, which is 1 year, hundreds of soldiers have lost their lives in this conflict. We know that the military takes the dictates of the ruling party and the ruling nation as they fight for their country. Are you concerned about that the casualties continue and there's still no end in sight?
Yes. Of course, you have just mentioned the military casualties, and there are also casualties on the civilian side, which are even more daunting. There have been allegations of war crimes, of hospitals being razed, of schools, and all of those kind of things. So those are even more concerning. Yes, of course, the military, has signed an agreement or has signed a contract to protect the country, to fight wars and all of that. But the soldiers also are people, who have lives, who have families, and all of that. And of course, we have seen at the very beginning, at the very initial stages of this war, we have seen pushbacks, even from Russian citizens themselves, calling the government to take a second look, and of course with the enrollment of civilians into the army, somewhere along the line, we have also seen pushbacks. We have seen protests in Moscow, in Russia, calling for the Russian government to take a look at this. So yes, it is concerning that the casualties continue, and not just buildings or material casualties, but human beings also are losing their lives, and that is concerning, especially since there doesn't yet seem to be any end in sight, as the war progresses.
Expressed in your opening statement a sense of disappointment about mediation and bringing this war to some sort of conclusion. While it continues, we have international relations between China and the EU on the side. We have the EU talking about influencing China against Russia. We have the United States talking about the release of the Wall Street Journal reporter. It seems as though there isn't much being done in the way of mediation anymore at this point.
Well, those are two issues in one, so I'll just take them one after the other. So the issue of China, and its involvement in all of this is quite strategic, and I think that China, I mean, the whole Russian invasion has made the international ecosystem, the international space, very tense, and every state seems to be working on eggshell, just so that they don't. So that they don't instigate or bring about any kind of consequence for themselves, that would be detrimental to their foreign interests. So China, I think, is trying to play safe, of course, maintaining ties with Russia and still trying to maintain its influence with the US, with the West, the UN and all of that. But it is obvious on which side they are. If you ask me, it's obvious on which side they are, because they seem to pursue the same ideologies that Russia, seems to be pushing in their campaign in Ukraine. But of course, time will tell us convincingly, where China stands. And of course, again, on the issue of the Wall Street journalist who has been detained, that also takes our mind back to the basketball, player who was detained just a few months back and has been released. So it is just a case of Russia just trying to score points. Of course, there was the issue of the bombing, the suicide bombing of the Russian blogger, just a few weeks ago. I think that was last week. So all of these are just efforts. I think, and of course, the situations or the issues behind the suicide bombing of the blogger has not yet been investigated to know exactly how that came about and who is responsible for that bombing. So all of these are just issues that I think are trying to complicate the process, trying to complicate the already complex campaign that Russia is carrying out in Ukraine. But like I said, time will tell us where all of this is going to lead to.
Let's call a spade, Dr. Ogu. Are we seeing at this point a breakdown in mediation efforts? Are we seeing a breakdown in any conflict resolution? Are we seeing a breakdown in both sides coming to the table? You recall, like last year, the Turkey connection and the France connection and the Israeli connection, and there was hope that these sides will come to the negotiating table at some point. Maybe unrealistic, maybe not, but there was talk about it. Now there's no talk of that at all.
Yeah. So just like you said, there isn't any effort for mediation at the moment. Of course, there were so many rays of hope, with the Turkish intervention, Israeli intervention, and all those interventions that were coming up, at the initial stages. But right now, all of those we can't see any efforts, to bring the two parties to the table anymore to talk, and that is worrisome. Because it actually might appear that that states have gotten tired, perhaps, or laid back in the process. But I'm sure that this will not take so long, because this war cannot continue for so long, And of course, it is also possible that the two leaders in question might get war weary and then decide, to come to the table themselves to speak. Even though that is very that's very unrealistic at the moment, but that is something that is still possible, So let us not give up hope yet, even though it appears that there seems to be no hope at the moment, But I'm sure that at some point, there would be some kind of intervention that will bring about some peace talks that might eventually lead to an end of this unfortunate incident that has taken over a year now.
Let me draw your attention to the alleged deportation of the children by Russia from Russian-controlled areas in Ukraine, and the drama that unfolded at the UN Security Council, where the US and Britain walked out on the Russian envoy. What's your opinion about this? It seems to be a very sore point, and with good reason.
Yeah, at the moment when the Russian state, assumed the UN Security Council presidency, I actually thought to myself that this timing was very unfortunate, because of course, no doubt, Russia would try to use that opportunity, to advance their cause, for whatever reason. So I was of the opinion that was a very unfortunate timing, but that is what it is, and it is not surprising that the US and Britain staged that walkout, because of course, as they have said, it appeared that Russia was trying to use the platform, to advance their own agenda. And of course, the issue of the allegation is still an allegation. It has not yet been investigated or confirmed that the lady in question, of course, the education minister or something like that, is actually engaged in deportation of children, and how legal that is or how illegal that is. So all of these are still allegations, but that is a firm demonstration of the fact that the West, and its allies will not are very critical of Russia's presidency in the Security Council, at this time, and that is not surprising at all.
And what's not surprising, or what may be surprising to some people, is the escalation of the conflict to the skies, where reports have it that the Russian aerospace forces have downed airplanes of the Ukrainian Air Force, and the Ukrainians say that they have shut down Russian assets. As this war continues to escalate, we know that the dimension of infantry warfare with the tanks that Ukraine has just taken delivery of from Britain and from Germany adds a very fearful dimension to the war if it becomes full-scale infantry across border warfare, which it has begun already, but if it escalates to that point.
Yeah, I mean, with the extent of support that that Ukraine continues to get from the US and the West, it appears that they're not running out of stock, they're not running out of ammunition and all of the military equipment that they need to prosecute this war. And of course, as the war continues, there will still be those kinds of incidences of shooting down planes and drones and all of that. But it only boils down to if Ukraine continues to get the support that they're getting, because of course Russia has a more it has more military strength if compared to Ukraine, and so Ukraine is only surviving in this war because of the support that it's getting from all of these allies that are continuing to support it militarily and otherwise. And if that continues, then it means that Ukraine is going to have its foot on the ground for quite, for quite a long time, prosecuting this war, because they're going to have all that it takes, and perhaps eventually they could win the war, if there's anything like winning the war, because I actually don't see any winner or any vanquish in this case.
Finally, how do you perceive the international sideshows, to put it mildly, of North Korea threatening to continue to test weapons, and the U.S. partnering with South Korea, and the Iran, on the other hand, being accused of supporting Russia? How do these situations impact the war, especially with the North Korea situation?
Yeah, so I have mentioned before, I think on this program also, I've mentioned before that, what I see going on with the Russian invasion, is more or less a repeat of the Cold War. So you see on one side, the Western ideologies of democracy, of capitalism and all of that, and freedom, liberty and all that, which is what the Western and its allies are trying to protect in their support for Ukraine. And on the other side, you see also, the conservative and communist regimes of Russia, China, of North Korea, Iran, and all of those also supporting, Russia. So that for me has been the bigger picture. It is just unfortunate that Ukraine has to be the battleground where all of this Cold War if you want to call it that, is taking place. So I'm not so surprised that there's that sideline. I mean, I'm looking for the word to qualify it. Of all of these countries, putting support for Russia, and then of course the Western allies and all of those putting up support for Ukraine as well, because that is what it is. It is basically a war of ideologies, and I mean, we are only yet to see where all of this would lead us to, because the war goes beyond Ukraine. The war goes beyond, it goes beyond the Ukrainian border. It actually portrays more of what the West and the East, stand for. And of course, we're going to see how that plays out with the involvement of North Korea and all of these allies. But I think that it is obvious that North Korea, has chosen a side. And of course, Iran has chosen the side with, of course, all the support that they've been giving to Russia, with the drones that they've been sending to Russia and all of that. So it's obvious on which side, these parties are. And of course, like I said, time will tell us, how all of this will unfold eventually.
Yes, and the Cold War comparison is quite apt and decent because all the items are in play that happened then, though it was after the world wars. But thank you so much for your contribution and your insight this morning to the program. Dr. Michael Ogu, Senior Lecturer, Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Babcock University. Russian President Vladimir Putin said during a televised meeting with officials that there was reason to believe Western intelligence agencies were involved in what he said were sabotage and terrorist acts carried out by Ukraine. Now, in a meeting of the Kremlin Security Council with the heads of the 4 Ukrainian regions that Moscow said it had annexed last year, Putin accused Ukraine of committing crimes against Russian administrators, security personnel, journalists, and teachers with the help of Western intelligence services. Russia frequently accuses Ukraine of killing civilians with shelling in parts of Ukraine that Russia controls and in Russia-bordered regions close to Ukraine. Putin was speaking 3 days after the Russian military blogger Vladimir Tatarsky was killed in a bombing in St. Petersburg, for which Russian officials have blamed Ukraine.
Киевский режим продолжает совершать тяжкие преступления против живущих там мирных граждан.
The Kyiv regime keeps committing grave crimes against civilians living there. They show mercy on no one. They hit cities and villages with missile strikes, artillery and mortar shellings. Terrorist attacks are being launched on a regular basis against the officials and law enforcement officers, journalists, public figures, teachers and lecturers. Moreover, the neo-Nazis and their accomplices operate not only within the territories of the new regions of the Russian Federation, but commit crimes in other parts of the country too. There is every reason to say that the resources of third countries, Western intelligence services, are engaged in the preparation of such sabotage and acts of terrorism. It is imperative to strongly suppress propagandistic and informational aggression waged by neo-Nazis and their pro-Western curators, expose lies, provocations, doctoring of facts aimed at destabilization of social and political situation in LNR, DNR, Donetsk People's Republic, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions.
Контроль за ситуацией должен быть надежно обеспечен.
President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, meanwhile, he welcomed the Belarus counterpart of his, Alexander Lukashenko, to Moscow for 2 days of talks, but in their opening public remarks, both men steered clear of the conflict in Ukraine. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said last week the two leaders will discuss Lukashenko's call for immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. Last month, Putin said Russia will deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Moscow is Minsk's closest political and financial backer. Lukashenko allowed Putin to use the territory of Belarus to launch as a launch pad for what Russia calls a special military operation in Ukraine in February 2022 when it began. Russia and Belarus are formally part of a union state, a borderless union and alliance between the two former Soviet republics. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says Russia's announcement that it will station tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus shows that a Russia-China joint statement days earlier amounted to empty promises. Russian President Vladimir Putin's announcement came just days after Russia and China jointly declared countries should not deploy nuclear weapons outside their borders. Stoltenberg also said Russia was becoming more and more dependent on China, partly as a result of international sanctions imposed on Moscow over its war in Ukraine. On the Ukraine NATO bid, Stoltenberg said it had to be based on the country being independent and democratic. which is now challenged by Russia's invasion.
Announcement that they will deploy tactical weapons, nuclear weapons, to Belarus just after they signed an agreement stating the opposite, just shows that these are empty promises, and what we need to watch closely is actually what Russia is doing, and that's exactly what NATO allies are monitoring closely. China refuses to condemn Russia's aggression. It echoes Russian propaganda, and it props up Russia's economy. China and Russia are also stepping up their joint military activities in the Indo-Pacific region. Allies have been clear that any provision of lethal aid by China to Russia would be a historic mistake with profound implications. Is facing, and we are also stepping up our. What we know is that Russia is more and more dependent on China. Trade with China has become even more important for Russia, not least because of the economic sanctions and the consequences of the war in Ukraine. And this is reflected in the fact that China is investing heavily in new, modern. We need to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation. Of course, any meaningful discussion about Ukraine as a member of the alliance has to be based on that Ukraine is a democratic, independent nation in Europe, and that's exactly what is now challenged.
Coming up, UEFA President Alexander Safran says it'll be difficult to lift Russia ban until war stops. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Insurer Alliance says it does not intend to renew a policy for the Nord Stream 1 project when it expires in late 2023. Alliance said it was part of an insurance consortium that provides coverage for the pipeline's 4 European-based minority shareholders. Statement on its website reads, the policy will expire in late 2023. It is not currently up for renewal, and Alliance does not intend to renew this policy. And joining us at this juncture is Channel Television business correspondent Ini John Mekwa. Ini, good morning.
Good morning, Lindy.
Russian Chamber of Commerce and Industry opens up an office in Delhi to enhance trade.
Yes.
So what's up with India?
Yeah, well, I just heard just before I came in, the NATO, one of the NATO officials talking about how Russia is depending so much on China now, because obviously China has been buying cheap oil from them for a while. But it's not just China. India is also playing a major role in helping sustain the economy of Russia in spite of the sanctions. And I mean, personally, I've been thinking how long it would take the West, to look the way of sanctioning both China and India, because they are playing major roles in sustaining.
Sorry to interrupt you, but India seems to be getting away with it, right?
Exactly.
Not getting that much criticism.
Exactly. So now we see Russia opening its Chamber of Commerce in New Delhi. And the target there already, they're talking about 50 companies, small-scale companies coming from Russia. They have the money. They have some of those resources in their crude form. But India does have the manpower, cheap labor, more like it, so they are moving some of their workings into India to use that cheap labor under the guise of existing companies in India, Indian companies. So you do know that a lot of ICT companies, some corporates and all of that, they left Russia at the beginning of the war, more of a way of showing solidarity, not supporting, what Russia is doing. Yeah. So we've seen a lot of companies in Russia missing out in components, parts, electrical parts, and some of those other little things which those foreign Western companies used to produce. So it looks like Russia is moving that work to India now. So India may be the one feeding them on it. because opening their chambers and going there with about 60 companies to support the small-scale businesses in India.
That's like full frontal support.
You know what I'm saying? Then the other part is this. We have also seen an increase in the purchase of diesel, jet fuel, and there's something they call vacuum gas, purchasing. India purchases crude from Russia. That's no longer news because they've been buying it cheap for a while. Now they refine it to all of these things.
Okay.
But guess where this refined Russian crude is going to?
Where?
It's going to Europe.
Right.
It's going to Europe, which is supposed not to be buying anything connected to Russia.
Same Europe.
You know what I'm saying? So we've seen that there's been an increase. For instance, jet fuel, which Europe used to buy from India. They used to buy from India even before the war, but it stood at about 154,000 barrels a day. Now it's gone up to about 200,000 barrels a day that Europe is buying from India. The crude is coming from Russia because India does not really have crude. They get crude from Russia, they refine it into diesel and all of that, and then sell it to their customers.
Is India cashing out?
Obviously.
Okay.
Obviously, there's cashing out.
Okay, let's look at the impact of the war on the residents of Russia. We know there's a commercial impact.
Exactly.
We know about the psychological impact. We know about the dissent within the country. What about the business impact?
So the business impact is some individuals in Russia are also cashing in on the war. So because those corporate people do branded T-shirts, shoes, you know how we do it here in Nigeria, we go to neighboring countries, Cotonou, and buy those and come and resell. A lot of individuals are now cashing in on that because those companies no longer operate in Russia. And yet people still need it. A lot of Russians, I think they've gotten used to Western brands and all of that. So some individuals go to neighboring countries, Armenia, Georgia, and they buy those things, and then they come back home and sell it to Russians who are not able to do it. So that's another business, small-scale business for some.
Let's see if we can squeeze this in. 3 of the world's largest grain distributors are to pull out of Russia by this July?
By July, yeah. You remember we had this conversation last week. So we had a major one then. I think Kaligan left. Now we have 3 others who are leaving Russia. Of course, that's going to affect the overall revenue of the economy that fits into the economy and all of that. And as I said before, it's more like the price of wheat is dropping, so it's not profitable for them. So they're not really willing to stay there. Plus, it becomes too cumbersome for them because of the payment for logistics, because of the sanctions. So even when you sell to your customers, shipping them out, insurance and all of that has become more cumbersome and more expensive. And so it just doesn't really work for them.
Great. More business news after this program with Ini John Mekwa, including or minus maybe Russia.
Thank you.
Finally on the program, the re-elected UEFA chief Alexander Safran says it'll be very hard to lift Russia's suspension from the European soccer governing body's competitions until the war in Ukraine is ended. Both UEFA and World Football governing body FIFA decided in February 2022 that all Russian teams, national or club, since will be suspended from participating in their competitions following the invasion. Most international sports federations have excluded athletes from Russia and its ally Belarus since the invasion, but some are now starting to allow them back into competition. Safran, who was re-elected as UEFA president, unopposed at the Congress, said a decision to ban Belarus from qualifying for the 2024 European Championship could only be made by UEFA Executive Committee.
Of course, it's a decision of executive committee in any case, but my personal opinion that I can say is that until the war stops, it would be very hard for us to change anything. We are not planning to take players to the court, but also if you take someone to the court, then UEFA doesn't do any measures. The court does it. So, in principle, we want it, or I want it to be heard that we will not. We'll try to be tougher in this direction because the level of discrimination is rising in Europe and elsewhere as well. Today, the most important thing is the Congress. We came for different reasons here, so I really don't want to comment. I can only assure you that we are worried about all the football. We care about football, and we will care about football, no matter which club, which national team. But I can't, and I don't want to comment this today. I can't because I don't know much, and I don't want because it's not up to me to comment things like that.
Alexander Safran's words bring this edition of Russian Invasion to a close. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Do have a great day.